Hello and welcome again to another episode of the Squared Circle News Network. This is episode 4, and I am your host, as always, Darren Patrick. And I just wanted to start, like I always do at the beginning of all these episodes, thanking you so much for clicking on this video, taking the time to watch, taking the time to come along on this journey with me. This is a passion project for me, and I appreciate you giving up your valuable time to spend a little time with me and talk about professional wrestling. As long as you're here, why not click the subscribe button, click the bell for notifications, and give me a like for the video. And as always, leave comments, positive or negative. Just be respectful. It's all I've ever asked from day one with this podcast is to, let's feel free to discuss and debate, but just be respectful. There's too much toxicity in the online wrestling community, and let's just try and be a little bit more civil and above the bar. Today's episode is, of course, WrestleMania weekend, so I'm going to go into the card a little bit, run down the actual final card for WrestleMania. As always with Vince McMahon, anything can change prior to the show, but just like last year, it is a 2-night show, which makes sense. WrestleMania has gotten far too long, just far too long, and to have it all in one night is too much for probably more than 90% of viewers. It's a lot to consume, too many matches, and really just it just takes away from what should be the enjoyment of the show. When you have to spend that many hours glued to the TV, it's difficult, especially a day like today. I don't know how it is with where you guys are, but it's going to be a warm day in Buffalo here. 80 degrees we're looking at, and just so many things you could be doing going into the night, enjoying time on the patio, having a few adult beverages, and just to be in the house in front of a TV for what would have been 8 or 9 hours prior to this year and last year is just too much. But let's get into the card for WrestleMania. Let's see what we have to offer. And I'm not going to make predictions or things like that. There might be certain situations where I'll take a guess at something just based on what I know about the way WWE runs its programming. But this is more just, going through the card and seeing what the highlights are going to be. So for night one, we've got the women's tag team match, and it's going to be multiple tag teams, and the winner of this match is going to get a title shot for tomorrow night on night 2. And for this lineup, we've got Natalya and Tamina versus Naomi and Lana versus Mandy Rose and Dana Brooke versus the Riot Squad. And, I've made my feelings about women's wrestling pretty clear and obvious in prior episodes, but looking at this lineup for this first match, there's not a whole bunch of talent here. There's not a whole bunch that could really make a case for women's professional wrestling. I mean, you've got Mandy Rose and Dana Brooke, which are clearly more there for their looks and for their talent. You got the Riot Squad, which can be respectable. Natalya is, she's got talent and potential, but they just really don't do anything with her. She just comes across as very bland and vanilla when she's in the ring. Tamina Snuka is just a disaster. I've never really seen anything enjoyable from Tamina Snuka. You've got Naomi and Lana, and out of respect for Miro, I don't want to really overly criticize Lana, but let's be honest, she's not a great professional wrestler, and I really can't say that Naomi is either. So you've got very little in this match that you could say is strong contenders to be a world tag team title holding team. But if I was to make a guess out of here, I'd probably say Naomi and Lana, regardless of talent or anything else, is probably the front runner to win this match and to go on to the title shot for night 2. Then we got the Raw Tag Team title, New Day versus AJ Styles and Omos. We got Seth Rollins versus Cesaro, Shane McMahon versus Braun Strowman, Bad Bunny and Damian Priest versus Miz and Morrison. We got the SmackDown Women's Championship on night 1, which is Sasha Banks versus Bianca Belair. And then the main event for night one is the WWE Championship, Bobby Lashley versus Drew McIntyre. Now going into night two, we've got the U.S. Championship, which is Riddle defending against Sheamus. The Women's Tag Team Championship, Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler versus the winner of the four-way match on night one. We've got Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn with Logan Paul in his corner. The Intercontinental Championship, Big E versus Apollo Crews. And we have The Fiend versus Randy Orton. We've got the Raw Women's Championship, Asuka versus Rhea Ripley. And then the main event of night two is, of course, Roman Reigns versus Edge versus Daniel Bryan in a three-way match for the Universal Championship. If I'm to go through this card, my feelings about WWE, again, are not anything secret. Just haven't been a fan of their product for several years now, but the thing about WWE programming is you can have good matches, and I'll never deny that. I'll never say something is bad just for the sake of my overall opinion on a product. But you can watch a show and you can see really good matches just because there's some, you've got some extremely talented wrestlers on the WWE roster, more than they ever take the time to showcase. But if I was to go through this list and pick out what I think my most entertaining matches of WrestleMania weekend are going to be, I would say the Tag Team Championship with New Day and AJ Styles and Almost. AJ Styles is a phenomenal wrestler. I mean, Almost is someone we haven't seen very much of, other than his bodyguard role for AJ Styles. I just don't know how he's going to perform in a full match like this on a WrestleMania platform. WrestleMania is always hyped as the showcase of the Immortals. It's WWE's biggest show of the year. And if you're going to have a match at WrestleMania, you definitely want to put your best performance out there. You don't want to half-ass it. You don't want to give your second best. But New Day, we all know how good New Day is. Kofi Kingston was the champion at one point until he was completely destroyed. But as a team, these guys are phenomenal. So I expect this to be a really, really great match. Seth Rollins versus Cesaro. As far as attitude and performance versus ability, I haven't been a fan of Seth Rollins for a considerable amount of time. The guy is probably one of the best wrestlers in the world, without a doubt. But he's very much, no matter what they do with his character, no matter what they do with his brand, his product, he just keeps giving the company line, and he's one of Vince McMahon's guys. And when I say that, I mean, he does what he's told, and that's why he's got the position he has in the company. It just seems like he doesn't care what he's capable of compared to what they're having him do. He's just always a yes man, and he'll be, until he can no longer perform or he no longer has any sort of draw. It's going to be what it is. If he decides that he wants to move on to possibly New Japan, possibly AEW, where he has creative freedom and he can wrestle the way he is completely capable of, he's going to be in this role for the rest of his career if he stays with WWE. But him and Cesaro are two phenomenally gifted wrestlers. Cesaro is just beastly strong for his size and his frame. I don't know what his workout regimen is like, but I've never seen somebody in that frame that strong. I mean, he's stronger. He's as strong, if not stronger, than guys the size of like Mark Henry and Braun Strowman. He's just absolutely a phenom, and I expect a good match between these two. You've got the WWE Championship with Bobby Lashley and Drew McIntyre. Two extremely talented guys. Bobby Lashley has really come into his own since the formation of the Hurt Business, and I'm going to go in a little bit more about the Hurt Business in a little bit, but Lashley and McIntyre, Drew McIntyre is one of my favorite wrestlers, and I'd love to see him in a place where he has a little bit more freedom and a little bit more ability and more of an open roster to give you different matches and not wrestle the same people all the time as tends to happen in the WWE. That's pretty much the three matches I expect to be really solid on night one. For night two, Riddle and Sheamus, again, it comes down to surpassing what the company allows you to do. When you have this much talent in the ring, it's difficult to not have a good match. They'd really have to throw some crazy, ridiculous stipulation in there, or whatever. It'd be hard to mess up, is what I'm trying to say. And I just expect a good performance from these guys. Then I'm going to say Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. And Sami Zayn's going to have Logan Paul in his corner, and I'm hoping for not a lot of silly interference, because Logan Paul is on his YouTube channel, he goes for the comedy, and I'm all for that certain measure of comedy in wrestling. And in a match like this, a little bit will work. Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, again, just like the others that I picked, two really talented wrestlers who can really perform and put on a show and just give you something to remember. Just don't make it too ridiculous. Let these guys wrestle. Let them do what they can do, and it's going to be it would be a memorable match. And then the Intercontinental Championship with Big E and Apollo Crews. Same story. We know how good Big E is. He's been so good in New Day for so long, and fans have been just kind of wanting him to go out on his own and see what he's capable of, because he is a championship caliber talent and deserves, to have some sort of title and a little bit more recognition. And Apollo Crews is just a great wrestler. Just a guy that he's been spending a lot of time in catering in recent years, and he's finally getting some TV time and a pretty high profile WrestleMania match. Well deserved. Happy for him. And I expect this to be just a good, solid Intercontinental Championship match. And to expand on that a little bit more, I'm happy to see the Intercontinental Championship actually getting some notoriety in the heart of the WrestleMania card, because it's just been a throwaway championship in the WWE for so long, and it's such a shame, because the Intercontinental Championship has such tradition and lineage, and there's been so many great wrestlers, so many Hall of Fame great wrestlers that have held the IC strap. And for so many years, going back to the beginning of the WWF, the IC Championship, the Intercontinental Championship, was a step you took to elevate yourself to the next level of becoming the World Championship. And it was that important, and you just knew you were watching. When somebody was contending and making a run for the Intercontinental Championship, you knew you were watching what was most likely going to be a future world champion making his progression, taking his steps to that championship. And it just made the Intercontinental Championship matches and programs just so more important and so entertaining, and they just haven't been in the WWE recently, and it's really a shame. As far as the matches, I really could care less about, the women's four-way tag team championship, the women's tag team title match. I don't see really anything that's really gonna just make anybody stand up and go crazy. Shayna Baszler with her MMA background is obviously somebody that deserves to be in a championship program, and it's putting her with Nia Jax is kind of a shame. I mean, I think Nia Jax needs somebody of that caliber to make her look more realistic and more believable, because she's a joke. She's not anything that I would call a quality professional wrestler, even for a women's division. Even where I expect less, Nia Jax is even below that. So, if I'm saying Naomi and Lana versus Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler for the tag team championship, and if that's the case, I don't expect much at all out of any of that. So, no interest in that match at all. The Fiend and Randy Orton, I probably have even less interest in this match than I do the women's matches, because what WWE has done to the Fiend and what they've done during the course of this Fiend Randy Orton program, they've made it absolutely silly and ridiculous and just absolutely no interest in this at all. It's just a joke to me. Um, every company does something questionable and silly and takes it to a little bit of a ridiculous level. But this is what they've been doing with the Fiend and Randy Orton is just I no interest, absolutely no interest. Um, I'm not going to say I have no interest in the Universal Championship with Roman, Edge, and Daniel Bryan. You just never know how they're going to handle this because, as far as I'm concerned, it should be straight up Roman Reigns versus Daniel Bryan. Edge is, again, one of these guys that the WWE likes to pull out of retirement. And, no doubt about it, Edge is in probably the best shape of his life and definitely has some more to offer in the ring, but he shouldn't be wrestling for championships. This is something for wrestlers that are in their prime, wrestlers that are there to make a difference and there to make their careers. There's so many more guys on this unused roster that should be developing and learning and growing and making moves towards championship title matches. And there's guys that are already there that should be in these championship title matches, and they're just not there because you're giving spots to Edge. Edge should be in the middle of this card wrestling somebody else, not for a championship of any kind. It's just not anything. It's unfair, and it's just shouldn't be happening. That's really all I've got on that. And there's other wrestlers that I could go through that WWE consistently pulls out of retirement, pulls off the shelf, that they think is going to be a big ratings grab, and it really isn't. I mean, it is. It gets them a moment of ratings, but it doesn't do anything long-term for ratings. You're not going to see the Raw or SmackDown ratings consistently go up because they pull Goldberg off the shelf and put him in some sort of program. Or, it's a shame, and it's not fair. I want to go back now to the Hurt Business. I talked about this briefly. Or actually, I didn't talk about it, but I said I was going to get back to it when I was talking about the Bobby Lashley match. And this goes back to a point that I made on a previous episode. I had stated that the WWE does not want to develop any megastars anymore. They don't want anybody taking away from their personal business. They don't want anybody moving on to something better and hurting their bottom line, their bottom dollar. I said that John Cena was probably the last megastar that you're ever going to see in the WWE, and something like this is proof of what I'm talking about. The Hurt Business was a faction in the WWE, something that they hadn't seen for a long time, probably since the first incarnation of the Shield. When the Shield first came out, they just had this huge popularity and a lot of buzz, and the Hurt Business, I think, even surpassed what they had accomplished. And for absolutely no reason, out of nowhere, Vince McMahon breaks this faction up. Can anybody explain to me how this makes sense in any sense of the word, in any sense of reality? How do you take something that the fans are clamoring for? And this is the biggest issue. The fans are asking for this. They're buying tickets to see this. They're talking about it actively online and forums and on podcasts, and it's something that everybody is enjoying and everybody wants, and Vince McMahon takes it away. And it's just purely ridiculous. And as much as I don't like corporations and sponsors and things of that, like stepping in and trying to control your programming, this little bit of news that I picked up on earlier today makes me happy. This is via Vince Russo on his RussoBrand.com website and his personal podcast. Vince Russo does consulting work for the USA Network, so he has an in on what's going on with programming. He knows about buzz and little things happening behind the scenes and what people are talking about. And he is saying that USA Network is very unhappy about the Hurt Business being broke up on TV, on Raw. They know that this is a ratings draw for them. The Hurt Business is something that can swing ratings, and Vince McMahon disbanded it. So USA is not happy, and we know in the past the USA Network was responsible for the 24/7 title. As ridiculous as that title is, and as much as it takes away from the seriousness and the development of more serious characters, USA Network wanted it for some reason. I'm not sure what their logic was in this title and what they thought it would bring to their programming and what they thought it would do for ratings. But they are now stepping into this. And if they had a say in getting the 24/7 title developed and on TV and as much involved in storylines as it is, then I hope they counteract Vince McMahon and have some sort of force and influence in getting the Hurt Business back together, because I'm tired of the fans being the ones to lose. The fans are the ones that pay the money to keep these organizations in business. The fans are the ones that made Vince McMahon a billionaire. And he just constantly spits on the fans, taking away what they want. It's not right. I'm tired of it. And I hope somebody can change this, because the wrestlers themselves, MVP came back to the WWE to very little fanfare. Nobody really cared about MVP coming back. I mean, it's not that anybody openly just hated MVP and thought he was garbage and didn't want him there, but he just wasn't somebody that was so entertaining that they were saying, oh man, I'm glad MVP is back. But putting him with Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin and building this Hurt Business was just a master stroke, and it's something that shouldn't be going away so quickly. Factions will run their course. It just makes sense sometimes to have dissension in factions, but not this soon. Not with something this popular, not with a faction that's this dominant within the brand. It's just not right on any level. I spoke recently about Chris Jericho forming the Pinnacle in AEW, and about how the right thing to do is to have this thing go, and I mean mega long term, because this is not just, I don't want to throw shade on talent, but this isn't like the Shield. This isn't like a lot of other mini factions that just kind of come and go, and they sprout up quickly, they fizzle out quickly, whatever. The Pinnacle should be being formed along the lines, and it is being formed along the lines of the Four Horsemen. And the Four Horsemen, for my money, is the most recognizable and the most dominant factions in the history of pro wrestling. And yes, WCW did let it get out of hand at some point by making it over. They just had so many members. I don't know how you could call it the Four Horsemen anymore. But the point I'm getting at is the Four Horsemen, Ric Flair, Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson, and I don't really throw Ole Anderson in there so much, even though he's one of the original members. I look more at a Barry Windham type guy who replaced Ole in the Four Horsemen. This is a faction that till today, people still recognize the Four Horsemen name and don't look at it as something that ever fizzled out, that ever died out. And yeah, there was, members come and go and whatever happened, but the core of that organization never really changed. As long as it was in its popularity, it was Ric Flair, it was Tully Blanchard, and it was Arn Anderson. Those were the three guys. And they had that kind of revolving fourth member, and then other members joined, and J.J. Dillon was involved for most of the time. But that's a faction that is timeless, and that's what the Pinnacle should be. And I'm not saying that the Hurt Business is quite along that lines, but they're close. They should be a faction that should have a dominant role in the WWE for a long time, because as little as the WWE has to offer on so many other levels, this is something that the fans are gravitating to and the fans get excited about, and to take it away from the fans is just an absolute ridiculous joke. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave my opinion on that. Again, if you have something to say about it, an opinion, if you want to discuss, just jump into the comments and let me know. Happy to talk about it. I'm going to move on to AEW right now, and a couple really interesting things popped up within AEW recently. On the most recent edition of Arn Anderson's podcast, Arn Podcast, he had stated that his son Brock Anderson has signed a developmental deal with AEW, and I love this because on a recent episode of Dynamite, his son Brock was shown on camera in the crowd, and he is completely Arn Anderson's son. I mean, the same body type, the same look. This kid is destined to be a legacy within pro wrestling, and I mean a legacy along the lines of a Cody Rhodes. This is somebody that, with Arn actively being in his life and having a part in his development, and probably taking part in the Nightmare Academy with Dustin Rhodes and Cody Rhodes and the kind of trainers that they have there. Dean Malenko is part of this. Jerry Lynn is part of this. This kid could very well be the next Arn Anderson, and to say that is an incredible compliment, and I wish the best for this young man. I hope he keeps his head on straight. He takes the advice of the trainers, because he's got some really good guys to feed off of. I'm sure Tully Blanchard is going to be involved in this, and just a lot of quality guys as far as ability and psychology and all the things that they can teach this kid. He could be destined to be a major superstar in the future, and I can't wait to see him on AEW programming, because I think he's going to absolutely knock it out of the park at some point. Also in AEW, this I thought was incredibly interesting, and boy, would I love to see something come out of this. On the last edition of AEW Unrestricted, the AEW podcast with Aubrey Edwards and Tony Schiavone, the Hollywood Blondes were a guest. It's Brian Pillman Jr. and wow, he's going to kill me for... No, he's not going to kill me. He doesn't know me. Griff Garrison. Name slipped my mind for a quick second there. But Garrison and Pillman Jr. were guests on the Unrestricted podcast. And Brian Pillman Jr. had stated that he recently reached out to Steve Austin via text message about Austin taking on a coaching role for himself and Garrison in the Varsity Blondes in AEW. And his idea for the gimmick is to have Austin in a coach's tracksuit, the whistle, the hat, the whole 9 yards, having him come out with the tag team before matches, having them do drills, push-ups, having them get ready before matches with stretches and things like that. And if they lose, just absolutely reading them the riot act and just going crazy on them. And I think this is... what the likelihood of this ever happening is probably very low with Steve Austin's relationship with the WWE and Vince McMahon. Austin's a true superstar, but he is also a loyal superstar, and I don't know if this could ever happen. But man, what an idea this is! I would love to see this, because I think this is something that's right up Austin's alley. He was the rattlesnake in the WWE when he started with the whole Austin 316 persona, and he kind of took that every which way that he could and really took it to the top of his game. But then he also had the corporate character where he wore the tie and he did things like that, and he laughed at Vince McMahon jokes, and he's proven that he can do things like this and be as good as he was as the Rattlesnake. And of course, there's a little bit of history to this, because Brian Pillman Sr. and Steve Austin were the Hollywood Blondes in WCW. So the tie-in is there. It's just a matter of, could it ever happen? And this could be nothing more than speculation, but man, if there's anybody that wouldn't enjoy this or can think of a reason why this wouldn't be a good idea, I'd love to hear your theory, because I think this would just be absolutely insane, and I would love to see it. And finally, I'm going to move on to New Japan Pro Wrestling here briefly. And again, I found a little piece of news online on Hiroshi Tanahashi's website recently on his podcast, the Aces High series. He talks about at one point having a scheduled match with Brock Lesnar in New Japan Pro Wrestling, and I'm not sure if I didn't catch the timeline, but the timeline isn't really here, but this is probably early 2000s, somewhere in that area. But he talks about Brock Lesnar's selfishness and his just cares about money more than anything else and not really who he's working for. And I talked about this on an earlier episode, and this kind of reinforces what I was saying. And I'm going to read the quotes here to you because I think it's important. I think the reason I think this is important is I don't want to sit here and just disparage Brock Lesnar. That's not my goal. My goal is to make the point that if you're a professional wrestler who lives and loves this business and has the capability to go out and entertain the fans, multiple days a year and do so at a high level and really not asking much in return, then how is it right that somebody along the lines of Brock Lesnar can step in when he wants, for as long as he wants, for as little as he wants, not work anywhere near the schedule that everybody else does, and get paid so much more money? It's not right. It's just not fair, and there's got to be a point when the wrestlers take notice and say, "Hey, this sucks and this isn't right." And this is Tanahashi making his point known here, and this is his quote on his Aces High Series podcast. And the first one is how Brock Lesnar got a special money situation in New Japan Pro Wrestling. And he says, "I go in there and Ricky Choshu says, Lesnar's not coming. I was just stunned, like the world had gone into darkness in front of me." Now, this is prior to a scheduled match between Tanahashi and Lesnar for the IWGP title. "I never knew the real ins and outs of the contract issue, but I do know he had a really special money situation going on. And I would imagine that was what was at the heart of it. It was really an unprecedented set of circumstances when it comes to IWGP title matches. Back in those days, we would have this big lion mark flag at the venues for fans to write messages of support on. Going into this match, we ran out of space on the first flag and had to get a second. That was how hyped that match was with the fans in the venues, but all of a sudden it was just gone." So Brock Lesnar has this world title match in New Japan with one of NJPW's top stars in Hiroshi Tanahashi, and for whatever reason, be it maybe it wasn't the money he wanted, maybe he asked for more at the last minute, but he just walks out on a title match. Is there anything more selfish than that? Is there anything more self-centered and more devious than that? I have absolutely zero respect for Brock Lesnar. And I haven't for a considerable amount of time, but knowing this now just makes it even worse. Tanahashi also goes on to say, on the type of match he would have had with Lesnar, technical, I think, it would have to be, you certainly couldn't match him for power. To be brutally honest, I could never get into any of what I saw out of Lesnar. It was all one-sided, a completely selfish way of wrestling. I saw him come up in the early 2000s and he was just pounding people. You never got to see anything from his opponents. I just didn't understand his deal at all. Again, he's hitting the nail on the head because this is the way it is, or it was, and probably going forward will be in the WWE because I'm sure he'll be back. But John Moxley, Dean Ambrose from WWE days, made the point that he was scheduled for a match with Brock Lesnar. And he wanted it to be something incredibly special, something that Lesnar would be remembered for, and something that would give him the ability to escalate his character to new levels. And he had this idea for just like a crazy, almost like a deathmatch type scenario with lots of weapons and lots of high spots and things. And Brock Lesnar wanted no part of it, and Brock Lesnar got his way. And at the time, Dean Ambrose, who was continuing to work the grueling schedule, making a ton less money, had no say in anything because Brock Lesnar gets what Brock Lesnar wants. And that's just plain bullshit. Finally, Tanahashi says how Lesnar was only more interested in a payday than wrestling. His quote is, "I think, to be honest, Lesnar didn't really care where he was wrestling as long as he got his payoff. That wasn't the case with Bernard and other foreign guys like that. It really took me aback that there was someone who cared absolutely nothing for the place that they were working. That was part of my motivation for that match." And that says it all. What more can you add to that? you're going into the ring with a guy who obviously openly has no concern for the legacy of the business, cares only about himself, cares about his paycheck, going home at the end of the day, coming back when he wants on his own terms. And why does a guy like that deserve to keep being brought back? I would cut. There's nothing Brock Lesnar that could offer my company that would make me want to sign him. It's nothing is worth it. It's not worth doing that to the rest of the talent in the locker room, to the ratings, the revenue, whatever. It just, nothing seems to be worth it, and I just wouldn't want any part of it. And, Tanahashi's not the only one to make a point like this. Shinsuke Nakamura, also who formerly of New Japan Pro Wrestling, was an IWGP heavyweight championship at one time, and Nakamura was scheduled to drop the belt to Brock Lesnar, because that's what happens when you're wrestling in a title match with Brock Lesnar. You're losing the title because Brock gets what he wants. But when he found out, knowing Brock Lesnar's history and his feelings and not caring at all for professional wrestling, Nakamura was literally, in his own words, in tears, thinking that he had to hand over this prestigious title to Brock Lesnar. He wanted no part of it. And I can't say that I disagree with him in any way. And hopefully at some point things change. Hopefully at some point guys like Brock Lesnar and Bill Goldberg and Hulk Hogan. I'm putting Hulk Hogan in this category because Hulk Hogan is not the Hulk Hogan of the early 80s. Hulk Hogan became a mega brand of his own at one point, and there became a time when it was all about the money, and he stopped caring about the business as he did about the money. So my point is, stop bringing in guys that can't work their ass off and can't contribute and can't be a long-term part of your brand, because you're hurting your product, you're hurting your roster, you're just causing dissension in your ranks, and it's going to be your undoing at some point. It's not fair to these guys that work their ass off all year long to have somebody come in for maybe 4 dates a year and make, if a wrestler makes $1 million, make 12 times what you're making for working just a minuscule fraction of the work you're putting in. It's not right, and it's got to stop. There's got to be a tipping point at some point where that changes, and I hope it's soon. That's all I got for today. I want to, again, as always, thank everybody for joining me, and I hope you click the subscribe button. Please click the like button, throw in some comments, and don't forget the little bell for notifications for any time that I add additional content. You will be made aware. I am looking in the near future to start adding more episodes, and I talked the other episode about doing some Squared Circle News Network extras, just little side notes and side episodes that zero in on specific things that I want to talk about. But until then, thank you for being here with me. I appreciate your sharing your time. And as always, please be good to yourselves, and please be good to each other. Till next time, thanks for joining me.